Hello, Namaskar. Welcome to my pod, the CAA Show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis, and my name is Juggi Bhasin. So, just when you thought that the real threat to freedom of speech, to an actual narration of events comes from artificial intelligence, a serial like IC814 comes along and you just sit up and you have to take notice and you understand that even today, the real threat to our freedoms actually comes from man-made content. IC184 is one such serial. It is not only controversial because of its Hindu-phobic content, as a lot of people are alleging. It is also controversial for a variety of other reasons, which I'm going to talk about in this podcast. But I am also looking at the larger picture, the big picture, and linked along with this controversy is actually also the controversy of Kangana Ranaut's film Emergency, which has been put on the back burner by the CBFC. The CBFC, of course, is the Central Board of Film Certification. This film has been stalled, and the biggest irony, which I can't help but talk about right now, is that we are in the era of the NDA government. This is not the UPA government. And in the NDA government, the work of an Indian filmmaker, I'm within quotes, I'm saying Indian filmmaker, Kangana Ranaut, the emergency has been stalled. It has been put on the back burner. Nobody knows when that certification is going to be given. And all said and done, the series IC814, despite some bit of cautionary advice, is still there on Netflix. It is flying high. It is doing very, very well. And a lot of people are actually, they are watching the serial. I mean, it's to me, it is actually supreme irony. But there's a larger question which this entire controversy, or both the controversies have raised. And that issue really is that how do we treat political content in this country? Are there different yardsticks? Are there different measures? Are there different standards for treating political content in India? We are forced to ask this question because of the treatment which has been given to Emergency, or rather the treatment which has been relaxed in the case of IC814. The disparity in the treatment is very, very obvious to a lot of people like us, to a lot of observers like us. And I'm going to raise this particular issue also. But before I talk of all these very controversial issues, I would again urge all of you, as I always do in podcast after podcast, that please do subscribe to my show, that is the CAA Show. It's a very simple procedure. You just have to click on that red button on your screen. Subscription is, of course, completely free. And once you have subscribed, you can watch my podcast. Would also greatly appreciate if you could like the podcast. And also please share the video if you like the video with your friends, your colleagues, and your peers. Okay, that was a bit of messaging from my end, of course. So let's now come right back to the main issue. Let's first, before I talk of all these controversial aspects which are associated with both IC814 and the film Emergency, let me first tell you my position on this entire matter. Where do I stand on this issue, and what is my stand on this issue? I think I need to make that assertion right in the beginning. I'm here in two capacities. One is as a podcaster. You might have seen many of my podcasts, that is the CAA Show. But there's another hat which I wear. I'm also a creative person. I've written 6 books. I'm writing a 7th book, which again is going to be a very interesting, controversial book, I hope. I also do theatre. So in that capacity, I'm also not only a creative person, I'm an artist, and therefore I am also part of the liberal arts in a larger context. And therefore my position on this entire issue is that absolutely there is space and there is a need for political content in our country. More and more political films should be made, more and more political series should be made, more and more series not only on politics, on political content, but on important issues like terrorism. They need to be made, they need to be screened. So I'm all for it. I certainly don't subscribe to censorship. I believe what is called I believe in responsible self-censorship. So that is my position, that is my take. And I would like to clarify that on this particular topic right from the beginning. But having said that, it is also a fact that right now our country is going through very, very turbulent times. It is also a fact that we are living in a very, very polarized age. Not only a polarized environment in a very polarized age, it is also a fact that we are living in a conflict-ridden world. And therefore, whatever political content which we write about, which we screen, which we talk about, has to be done with responsibility. I also agree with that particular aspect also. So, that having said, let's take a little bit of a historical look at political content in India. There has been some outstanding work, not too much of it, I would say, but some bit of historical, there is some bit of historical, authentic, really good work which has been done in this sphere. I think the finest political film after all these years, and it was made way back in the 70s, still happens to be a film called Garam Hawa. Those of you who haven't seen it, I would urge all of you to see it. It's a brilliant political film. The convictions, the ideological convictions of the filmmaker are completely different from mine, but even then, I have no hesitation of recommending that film. It is a very powerful political film. There was another film which wasn't so well made, but still it had a certain drive, a certain energy of its own called Kissa Kosika. Please see that film also. And a third film which I would recommend, which is my all-time favorite international film, is a film called Z by a filmmaker called Costa Gravas. I would urge all of you to see that. The point, why am I giving this historical perspective is because I'm saying that over the ages, political or terrorism-related content has been made in India. It's not that it has not been made. Much of it, to be honest, has been very clumsily made. I've just given you the names of certain outstanding works, which I think you can watch or you can talk about, you can read about certain books. In fact, I think the writer of this particular serial, that is IC814, Adrian Levy, is a reputed writer, and you can always see he's written about the killings which happened in Mumbai, the terrorist attack which happened out there. So he's written a very good book about that. So that I have to give it to the person. Now, having given you a kind of overview of political content, let me first tell you what are the objectives really of political content, or what should be the objectives. And anyone who says that, oh, political content should not have any objective, we should have the freedom to say anything or depict anything we want, I'm sorry, I don't agree, because political content by its very nature is sensitive. It can be incendiary. If it is not handled well, it can not only provoke, but it can cause a big, big problem. And therefore, one has to be very, very cautious. One has to be very careful. The important thing to remember in political content is that it should be authentic. It should be very authentic, and it should not be, it can be disruptive also, fair enough. I would say if it is disrupted, if it forces you to think, fine, absolutely okay, I'll go along with that. But political content should not be propagandist. That's the point which I want to make, and that's the main feature, the main point which I want to make in this entire podcast. When political content, when controversial topics become propagandist, or they are devised, or they are created, or they are launched with a certain political gain in mind, then it becomes a problem. And I wouldn't say IC814 is one of those serials. I think Netflix has produced some brilliant content over the years. I also am a great follower of Netflix, and all power to this OTT platform. But sometimes they have gone wrong. And I'll give you a couple of instances. And in this case, I think they might have gone wrong. And I'll tell you the problem with this serial as we go along. By all accounts, and to be honest, I really haven't seen the serial as yet. I've just started watching. I'll probably watch it over the next few days. I think it has been, for a change, the production values I think are really good. The acting is pretty good. All that is good. The problem really lies actually in the content. The problem lies in certain sensitive areas where they have overstepped the line. And we have to understand, have they done it deliberately or not? A lot of people are alleging that IC814 is Hindu-phobic. The two names, the Hindu names which have been used for the hijackers, have been used deliberately. Of course, I have to watch the full series. I'm being very honest, I still haven't watched completely, but I believe those Hindu names are running throughout the 6-part series, giving the impression that the hijackers were Hindu, giving a larger impression, and please hear my words very carefully, in today's day and age, that the community which is actually doing acts of aggression, the community which needs to be very carefully watched, actually is probably the majority community in our country, that's the Hindu community. It is fitting in part of a larger narrative in the woke hemisphere, in the woke stratosphere, in the woke universe, and the woke universe spreads all over the world actually right now, if you ask me, that like the Jews, the Hindus also are a kind of a militarized kind of a community. They subjugate minority communities. So that is part of the narrative. And the other part of the narrative of the series is also in the sense that the minority communities, if they do these acts, or they do acts of like hijackings or acts of terrorism, they're probably forced into it. They're not so bad after all. That's the other criticism which is coming of the series. So let's keep this, let's park these thoughts in our mind and then address the larger problem which the series has actually created. The larger problem which I see, which is happening with the series, is that in this instance at least, Netflix is a bit on dodgy ground. They earlier had made a series called Cleopatra. Cleopatra is of course that famous queen of Egypt, and in sync with the larger woke narrative of the world, they had depicted the Egyptian queen Cleopatra as a black woman had portrayed Cleopatra. And I still remember at that time when the series was released, there had been huge protests in Egypt. The Egyptians didn't like it. They said that Cleopatra was never a black person. All power to black people, of course, that's not the point at all which we are making, but the fact is it was what they call a misrepresentation of history, of historical facts. Maybe something on similar lines has been done by Netflix in the IC814 series, because the criticism which is coming is that not only it is these Hindu names are being used, there is some leeway being given to the hijackers, but more important, a lot of leeway, a lot of room is being given to the Pakistani intelligence agency, the ISI, that they were really behind this. That role has not been highlighted. And number two, the big problem which is also being depicted is that the series shows the Indian state as completely incompetent. Now, this is a very interesting area which I want to talk about. If governments are not doing well, if dispensations are failing, then of course, as creative people, I think we do have the license to talk about them, to criticize them also, to give a critical analysis of that. But again, we have to choose our times. We have to choose what times we are and what is the atmosphere in our country at a particular point in time. And at a point in time when politics in India are so polarized, is that the best of things, that you bring around a serial where you show that the government was completely incompetent? And we do know that a lot of errors, a lot of glitches, a lot of mistakes were made when the plane landed at Amritsar. Something could have been done out there. All the right commands were not coming from the Prime Minister's office. There are a lot of controversies. I don't want to get into all that, because then we'll take the entire podcast in a different sphere altogether. But was this the right time to show all that, to highlight that particular aspect? So that's another thing we have to keep in mind. But the broader problem which I see with IC814 is that if the ISI is carrying out the hijacking, if the Taliban are behind it, whoever. But the fact is, they were not Hindu citizens. It's as simple as this. And even if you're mentioning two Hindu names, you should have immediately then, in the series, you could have written in such a way where it is absolutely clear to the audience that these were hijackers based out of India, out of Pakistan, out of Afghanistan. That has not been done, of course. And then you have to question the intent of the series maker. Anubhav Sinha, I think that's his name. You have to question even the content of the platform also, that what are you trying to project out there? Why have you given the green signal to something like this when you knew this would not cause a disruption, but this would cause a controversy? Why did you give the green signal then? So let's park these thoughts when we have talked a little bit about IC814. Now, how is this done? Before I talk about emergency, I'm going to talk a little bit about Kangana Ranaut's emergency also. Let me explain to you how these platforms, and this is a point which not many people have highlighted, let me highlight this particular point. How is this done where you cover your backsides? You don't get into too much trouble, but you still cause disruption, and you certainly cause a lot of controversy. If you see the opening frames of the series, okay, and I watched it carefully, the opening frames of the first frame of the series, and it starts with this disclaimer, and I'm going to read 2 or 3 lines of the disclaimer. The lines are: this series, that is the IC814 series, is a work of fiction which is set against the backdrop of certain lifelike events, characters, places, names, and events in the series have been creatively conceptualized. Okay, that's the catch in the bag, that's the real story. What they have done is, what the platform, the OTT platform has done is, what the filmmaker has done really is that they have covered their backside. They have abrogated for themselves, they have got for themselves the creative license to twist, turn, mold, mutate the story any which way they want. It's as simple as this. Technically, they might be correct. Let me add that. I'm not a student of law. I don't understand law so well, so I'm not in a position. Maybe this can be challenged in a court of law, but I don't know. But on the face of it, it does appear that they have covered, as I said, the backsides. They have got for themselves the creative license to change the story any which way they want. Now, if I was doing the same series, if I was writing this series, I would do in a slightly different way. I would probably bring in a lot of controversial things, fair enough, but I would use a simple line in the beginning that this is a work of fiction, period. I would have done that. I would not have indulged in this doublespeak. I would not have indulged in this, there's a Hindi word which I'm trying to think of, chokri or something it is called, where you get whatever you want, you allude to all the important people, at the same time you twist and turn any which way you want. I wouldn't have done that. That to me is a little dishonest. And I think that's the big problem with the IC814. I would have done it differently. I would have set a disclaimer that this is a pure work of fiction. Now, it's up to the people after that. I would have changed the names also. I would have not said IC814. I would have said IC maybe 567 or some other numerical figure. People would have probably understood which I'm talking of, that particular airline of where it is set. But I would have done it differently, where I would have given this complete, I would have taken a break from the sense that I'm not exactly basing it on that. And therefore, in that circumstances, if I were to use the name Bhola, if I were to use the name Zamaruddin, if I were to use the name Pestinji, or if I were to use Michael or Michael Jackson or whatever, Hindu, Sikh, Parsi, Christian, any other name I wanted to use, I could have used it. Fair enough, because that is a work of fiction. But this is a quasi-realistic work. Quasi means it is not fully, okay? It is an approximation. And that is what has given them the legal getaway to the filmmakers to make this kind of a series. So, creative interpretation by Netflix, I would say it's a little dishonest. You should be very clear. And why should you be clear about these things? And that's the point which I want to talk about. You should be clear about these things because you're dealing with very, very sensitive topics. If nothing else, please remember there was this person called Katyal, a passenger on IC814, who was stabbed by the hijackers, who was killed. And anybody who has any kind of sympathy for these hijackers or for their cause or for whatever background they come from, whatever country they come from, please consider he was traveling along with his wife, Katyal. He was killed in front of his wife. He was stabbed till he bled to death. The trauma of 8 days when the pilot, he was literally shuttling his aircraft, trying to see that the aircraft did not crash because it was completely low on fuel when it was trying to land at so many different airports in the entire sector, right from Amritsar to Kabul to Lahore, all these places. The trauma, the passengers went through, the trauma of the families which were outside, all that. For their sake, there should have been honesty. And that to me is the real problem. It has been, in that sense, it might have been wonderfully filmed. It might have been acted very well. I give top marks for that. I'll see it and I will really comment on that maybe in a later podcast. But it is dishonesty. When you fudge around the truth. And that to me is the real central problem of IC814. Now let's talk a little bit about the film Emergence. And that to me is again a shocking thing. Nobody has seen Emergency, okay, because it has not been released. But the first off the ball is of course the SGBC, as always. SGBC, see the track record of the Shiromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee, right from the days, and I remember the days of terrorism from the 80s right till today also. They're doing exactly the same thing they have been doing. And as a Punjabi and as a Sikh, it really hurts me, pains me to see the SGPC, how it undermines the interests of Punjabis all over the world. But SGPC off the bat, how dare she make a film called Emergency and show the Sikhs in a bad light in disrespecting them. Now, nobody has seen the film. The fact is, Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated, and as Kangana rightly pointed out, that was she struck by lightning? She was killed by her own guards. We all know that, Byan Singh and all that assassination. Everybody knows, every child knows about it. It's there in the history books. Then what is your objection to it? If she's showing that sequence in the film, what is objectionable about it? But no, ban it. Now that's one part of it. But the worst part of it, and that's the point which I want to make in this podcast, is what is wrong with our CBFC, the Central Board of Film Certification? You know, a body like the HGPC, which honestly nobody takes seriously. Not even in Punjab, no Sikh take them seriously. If you really ask me, at the top of the hat, you know, they keep issuing these edicts, and in Punjabi they're called tankhiyas, which means that now you are an outcast from the religion. Nobody cares, honestly. True faith resides in your own heart. Inside you, your teachings of Guru Nanak are eternal. They will always live within you. You don't need SGBC or anybody else to interpret those teachings for you. But what is wrong with the CBFC? The CBFC actually again is a quasi-government body because they've been appointed by the government. And then on what basis have you stopped the film, or you put it on the back burner, or you're not giving a certification because of pressure from the SGBC, or is there pressure from the government? Because the government is spook, and if it is true, we need to know about it. I have no idea what's really going on out here. But if that is true, then it really shows that the central problem, which again is the problem which I'm highlighting in this podcast, is that the present government, even though it's an NDA government, a so-called right-wing government, and very strong on the interests of the majority community and blah, 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 and all that we keep hearing. In actuality, what are they doing? In actuality, you stop a filmmaker from one of your own. Kangana Ranaut is a BJP member of parliament. She is one of the most brilliant actresses this country has ever seen. And her films deserve to be seen. And good or bad, we will criticize or we will appreciate it later once we have seen it. But you stop, if that is true, I'm saying if that is true, you stop the screening of that film. The CBFC, on what basis they have stopped this? And therefore the government, the charge is being leveled against the government, and charges is coming that are you suffering from an inferiority complex? That you want to please all the foreign platforms because Netflix has walked away with some kind of a cautionary advice. As of now, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. That okay, 814 can continue whatever, please don't show these kind of things or whatever, that's it. But this film has been stopped. We are not saying an emergency. I want to see emergency. I want to see what this film is all about. But I can't see it because the CBFC in their wisdom have decided, and maybe they have been pressurized by the government or by some other powers to be, I don't know. Or is it that there is an inferiority complex of the government that they just need to keep appeasing the liberal lobby, the left liberal lobby again and again and again? And even in my earlier podcast, I've given you numerous instances that they did the same thing with the Israel Film Festival, which was supposed to be held in Mumbai, and they stopped that festival. They junked that festival because that festival was the signature campaign had been started by of all the people, Mr. Nasiruddin Shah, who by the way happens to be in this series also. This is what if this is what the government is doing. I again don't want to immediately give an absolute statement that this is what the government is doing. But if it is doing, for God's sake, please throw away your inferiority complex. Be who you are, what you were elected for, and by all means balance all sides, but don't start suppressing your own people. People who want to make an honest work of art, which I think Kangana Ranaut is probably attempting to do out there. And that to me is a big problem which I see. Then let's move a little forward from these two issues and let's talk of the larger problem. The larger problem with this controversy which I see is that you are actually falsifying narrative. And you are not only falsifying narrative because IC814 was a very traumatic, it was a very thorny issue at that particular time. And maybe there's part of a larger game plan that you link that BJP government with today's, dispensation. I don't know what the filmmakers are up to, what the platform is up to. Maybe that if that intent is there, that's not the right thing to do. The other charge which we are leveling also is that the larger problem is that you are propagating wokeism. And what is wokeism entailing? Wokeism by its very definition it's actually the human being's effort, what artificial intelligence does, that is to falsify narrative. Now, things have happened in the past, so therefore you want to color the past, change the past, you want to give different names to the characters of the past, you want to break the idols of the past, you want to break statues of the past, you want to do all the things. That is what wokeism does. And this is what exactly IC814 is doing, where you tinge the colors of the serial with some kind of a Hindu-phobic content. Is that the right thing to do? Okay. And the other big problem which I see in the larger problem area is that you are taking sides vis-a-vis communities. What do I mean by that? You are showing a particular community, which is the minority community in the country, as always being under the under the boot, as who are constantly harassed. You are showing the majority community which is in the country as being, they are always the aggressors. In other words, you are becoming what is called Hindu phobic. It's coming out in a lot of series. I've seen a lot of those series now on this platform, unfortunately, where this thing is coming out again and again and again. And whether the content heads are doing it or whether there is somebody else is directing them to do it, I don't know. But I'm just saying it's becoming a problem. And this thing of finger pointing. See, I am certainly, even today, I am saying, I want to make my stand again very clear. I'm not recommending, as a lot of people are shouting and jumping the gun and saying that have a censor board for OTT platforms. I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. I don't think so. I think the OTT platforms should have the right to screen the content they are producing. It's actually it's a great relief to be free completely from the censor board and all these other things. I support that. But at the same time, the question which I'm posing for the OTT platforms is that have you not heard of something called self-censorship of self-control, where you balance all sides and then you show content? If you start showing biased content, if you should start showing content which tilts to one particular side, then what is the difference between you and some of these meta platforms and now the proof has come out in the open, where Zuckerberg has openly said that Facebook was being pressurized in the last elections in America. Is that the way you are heading, or you're already on that way? And these are questions that these platforms have to answer. I don't think so. The government should do anything stupid right now, like ban Netflix or this. I don't support all that. I'm being absolutely clear. I don't support censorship. I don't support having a censor board. But I do support the fact that responsible ombudsman, responsible citizenry, responsible people should be appointed somewhere, maybe by the platform itself, who will probably view the content, who will judge the content, give suggestions, so that a balance is struck between all different sides. By all means, show different sides of the picture. Show all possible sides of the picture, but don't show only one side of the picture or a biased side. That is not kosher, that is dangerous, and that is something which I certainly don't support. Then, the problem in that larger context which I'm talking about is that what we are living in an age where anything we say, anything we show, audiovisual content can be distorted, it can be bended, it can be mutated, and it becomes a worry because you can do the same thing to not only IC814, but you can do to any important historical or political events from the past. There have been so many hijacking attempts in India, for instance. There have been hundreds and thousands of terrorist attacks in India. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to start distorting events and showing series like that, as you have done in this case? That's the real danger. Because once you are allowed to get away with all this without somebody questioning your tactics, then you will not only do that again and again, but you will do it and you will carry it to some strange degree where you will completely distort. As I said, they tried that in Cleopatra. They changed an Egyptian woman into a black woman, which was absolutely unnecessary, not needed at all. They're doing it now in series like Bridgetown, I don't know what is it called, where they are showing queens from ancient England, black queens. Where were there black queens in ancient England? And when you distort, when you falsify a narrative, this is what happens. And maybe the same things will start happening in the Indian context, where historical events, historical passages, historical major events in India, terrorism events, all these events can be distorted any which way. Then what will happen? You will start pitting communities against communities. Where does it end? That's what we really need to think about. And therefore, in the final analysis, I will conclude this podcast by saying that by all means show political content, show these important events from the past, because the past always guides us in the present, in the future also. It's important we show. We should not be, there is an English word called pusillanimous. We should not be craven with fear. No, we are bold, we should be honest, we should show events, but show events as they were, as they are, not as you think they should be. And therefore, it is very important to give a disclaimer in the beginning that this is a pure work of fiction. Once you give that disclaimer, and please don't use real names, then you can show anything you like, I think. That is a disclaimer which should be used. That's my particular input. That's my particular advice which these people should be doing. But till that happens, we have to raise these issues. These anomalies, these mistakes have to be pointed out, because we are living in very, very tricky, very, very turbulent times. And anything which disrupts harmony, the peace and quiet of the country, that should not be encouraged or even tolerated. And so on this note, I come to the end of this particular podcast. I hope you liked it. You like my show, please do subscribe to it. And on this note, it's goodbye and cheers from my end.